so I did it. And do you remember back in the fall, we'd be together all day long? Do you remember us holding hands, in each other's eyes we'd stare? Do you remember the time when we fell in love? Do you remember the time when we first met? Do you remember the time when we fell in love? Do you remember the time? Do you remember how we used to talk? You know, we'd be on the phone at night till dawn. Do you remember all the things we'd say, like I love you so I'll never let you go? Do you remember back in the spring, every morning birds would sing? Do you remember those special times? They'll just go on in the back of my mind. Yeah. Remember the time when we fell in love? Do you remember the time when we first met? Do you remember the time when we fell in love? Fell in love. Do you remember the time when we fell in love? Do you remember the time when we first met? Do you remember the time when we fell in love? Fell in love.
You and I used to sit there and reminisce. You and I, we used to kiss. You and I, we used to just hold each other underneath the moonlight. Used to talk about how everything was so right, everything was so good, everything was just the way that it should be. So I wanna just be so free. Do you remember? Everything was so good, baby girl, come back to me. Here we go now.